everybody, and welcome to our last webinar for the 2021-2022 webinar series with the Chippewa River Writing Project. I'm going to let my co-host Jeremy introduce himself first, and then I'll introduce myself, and then I'll introduce our speaker this evening.
Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy Heiler. I apologize for not being on camera. I'm at my son's baseball game this evening. It is a pleasure to be here. I am a former middle school teacher, 21 years. I am now an education consultant, and it is a pleasure to have everyone here this evening that can make it. We know this is a tough time of year, and we look forward to having an awesome webinar with Ana tonight.
Thanks, Jeremy. My name is Becky Schwartz. I teach high school English at Springport Public Schools in Jackson County, Michigan. I have taught all sorts of grade levels, all the way from 7th through 12th grade English. But tonight we have a really special guest. We have Ana. She is one of our upper level post-secondary educators with the Chippewa River Writing Project. She does a fantastic job with equity in both her classroom and has a lot of great advice on how to continue having equity in all sorts of classrooms across many grade levels. She also is a really successful teacher with teaching diverse texts in classrooms, and has lots of great tips on how to handle that and how to handle equity and diversity in your classroom. She is amazing. She is super smart, super passionate. Every time we have a conversation, I walk away with like 15 different ideas, and I have to narrow it down to my top 5 that I want to tackle first. So without further ado, Ana, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Becky and Jeremy, for the wonderful introduction. I'm humbled by your kind words. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and just introduce myself in my next slide. So before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to read the land acknowledgement from the Chippewa River Writers Project, to both remember and show respect for the indigenous peoples and their ancestral territories on whose land we reside and work. The Chippewa River Writing Project is based at Central Michigan University, located in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Founded in 1892 as Central Michigan Normal School, CMU is located on the ancestral grounds of the Council of the Three Fires, the Anishinaabe, of whom the Saginaw Chippewa Nation is one. Seated in the 1855 and 1804 treaties, this land was named the Isabella Indian Reservation and remains part of the homeland of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe. It is our responsibility to care for this land and its people, and to be intentional and inclusive in our work. We recognize that this acknowledgement is only meaningful when combined with purposeful actions and genuine relationships that honor the land and its people. These actions include advocating for histories, cultures, language, and the territorial rights of historic Indigenous peoples. As our writing project grows to include members from outside Mount Pleasant, we invite all CRWP members to recognize their own connection to the lands on which they reside, and to honor their own responsibilities to the original keepers of those lands. So hello everyone and welcome. As Becky said, my name is Ana Contreras. I'm a teaching consultant with CRWP and a faculty member in the English department at Harper College, which is a community college located in the western suburb of Chicago in Palatine, Illinois. I primarily teach English 101 and 102 composition courses, but occasionally I'll teach literature courses also featuring American writers from varied cultural backgrounds. I'm also, in addition, a doctoral student at Central Michigan's Doctor of Educational Technology program, and the focus of my dissertation research centers around incorporating equitable teaching practices in varied learning environments. This past spring, I recently finished a course at Harper College entitled Redesign for Equity that included K-12 teachers from our partner schools, district partner schools, and also incorporated colleagues from Harper College. So this presentation focuses specifically on how we can incorporate equitable practices into our syllabi. The reflection is based upon the work of Estela Marabes Ben-Simon and her syllabus review guide from USC, the University of Southern California. I was introduced to this tool when I attended Ben-Simon's workshop about creating equitable syllabi. One while the tool she used is designed to include more than we can possibly cover here, I've taken some questions from this reflection tool and just trying to give us a place to think about equitable practices and what we can do to incorporate them in our courses. However, I'm going to put the link to the equity tool in the chat. So if at any time you'd like to review the syllabus guide on your own time, please feel free. I think it's, you know, a worthwhile reflection, and it gives a lot of tools and tips, and it is a lot more than just questions. There's a lot of interactive pieces that will help you as you work through the guide. So we'll just touch on a little bit of what she worked on in that guide, and then today, and then you can do the rest on your own time when you have that, when that's available. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So our workshop today is going to be more reflective, and I'm going to ask you to do not some, but a lot of a writing. So at this time, you might want to bring up a syllabus from one of your classes and find something to write on or write with, just so you can take notes. And then we'll take a look at them at your syllabi later and as we keep reflecting. So I'll just give everybody a minute to do that. Just give me a thumbs up when we're ready to move forward. I think the advantage of, you know, taking a look at this at this point in the semester, I know that a lot of us are probably going to be doing work, you know, over the summer, or as we think about and reflect on the year that we've had, we're going to have a lot of these reflections kind of milling around in our minds at the time. So this maybe is a good time to go through some questions and do some writing about it. Okay, so now that we have, we're ready to move forward, let's just take 5 minutes and reflect on this prompt. The question is, what does equity mean to you? How would you define that term? And perhaps you can think of a story or a time or an incident where you were or weren't practicing equitable pedagogy in your course. So we'll take 5 minutes just to write. Maybe finish the idea you had. Okay. So I hope that we have some great narratives to share and some wonderful ideas. I'm going to take a page out of Andy's book, since we all know who Andy is, and just ask everyone to share one word or one phrase from their reflection.
I'll jump in here. I think the word that jumps out to me rereading it is conscious. And I could probably easily make that word unconscious with, you know, the parentheticals in front of it, because in all my efforts to try to be more conscious about equity and equitable practices, I'm sure that I am still not fully embracing that ethos and enacting those pedagogies, and unconsciously could still be reinscribing some of the same inequities that have probably existed in my courses and others for decades, if not centuries. And so just the word conscious / unconscious resonated for me.
Thank you. And Becky, she writes in the chat, fair. Is anybody else, would anybody else like to share a phrase or word?
That was my word too, Anna, is fair. And I realized that I don't know the actual definition of equity. So a lot of what I wrote about was, wow, I don't really know what it means. I think of it as fair or equality, but who decides what that is?
Thank you, Lori.
Well, and if I can share for just a second
Please.
too. Yeah, my fair is in like quotation marks, right? Because, you know, there's a common saying in education that what's fair is not always equal. And so we have to look at like what that is in those specific circumstances, and kind of reflecting on the second question that you had on this, Anna, like when is a time where you weren't practicing equity? You know, I think that's really, I think the pandemic has definitely highlighted the inequity. Like our students don't have the same capabilities at home, or they don't have the same, like, just, infrastructure that they do in school buildings where you could kind of control some of that environmental pieces. A lot of times in the last year, I find myself asking the question when students are asking for extensions on due dates or things, it's like, okay, what do you think is a fair extension? Because I don't know, like if they have to drive to McDonald's and sit in their car to do their work, a day might not be a fair extension. So it's kind of an interesting concept and kind of thinking, like Lori said, I really struggled with, I don't know, the actual like technical academic definition for equity.
Yeah, and I think what everybody's conveying is something that I think a lot of folks feel when it comes to equity in their course and how they practice equity pedagogy. When I was writing because I like to write along as well, what I thought of was difference, and not just because of one thing that I practices with this particular student I was thinking of, but a culmination of things that she and I worked together with throughout the semester that made a difference in her life and in her work. So that was the word I was thinking of. But let's go ahead and explore this a little further. So if we go on to our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about this definition of equity. So what is equity pedagogy, right? Equity pedagogy is defined as teaching practices that center students in the learning environment in order to support students from traditionally underserved communities. And this is a definition that I got from McGee Banks. So in all our words and phrases, we all kind of came across with our own perspective, our own perceptions of equity. And I'd like to add this first thought about how we define equity as another step in this process of how we think about revising courses to be more equity minded. And that is to do some self-reflection. So when we begin this process, the first step is to kind of look internally and think about what do we bring to the classroom when we enter? What are our perceptions and our beliefs? What are our biases, conscious or unconscious, as Troy was articulating earlier? What do we bring to that community of students? And so I think by reflecting on these thoughts and these biases and assumptions, we can think more deeply about the steps that we can take to provide more opportunities for our students and incorporate some of these equitable practices. So first, I think we always need to kind of begin with self-reflection, and then we can begin to think more about what we do after, after we've kind of worked through some of those things. I think another word that I would share in regard to equity pedagogy is opportunity. So including more equitable practices on our courses provides students with more opportunities to demonstrate their learning, to better understand ways they can be successful in our courses, opportunities to feel included and welcomed in our course and even in our disciplines as a whole. I know that for me, I don't think I had a computer until I was in my second graduate degree, or maybe it was my first, but still not until I got in there. And now I'm in a Doctor of Educational Technology program, right? So the ability to see myself would have made a huge difference perhaps in my own education, right? So, and brought to me now, as I kind of look and see so many, women who are in this field, it brings a feeling of belonging as I think about my place in the world and my place in the field. But it also allows our students to engage more in our courses, as I hopefully engage in my courses. So I think that providing equity in our course, it can make a really big difference, right? And of course, it's going to be different in context to context, course to course, and in different classrooms. But I think there are still things that we can do to increase the equity, regardless of those spaces, or in consideration of those spaces. I think that's what I should say. All right, next slide, please. One more. So a good place to start thinking about how we might make some of those revisions in our course is to think about the syllabi. Often the syllabus is the first place where we communicate with students, where we're given that first impression that we make on students. It's a document where students learn about what they're going to be doing and the kind of the tone of our course. They're also learning about us, right? So in this first impression, can we consider ways that we can make students feel welcome, ways that they can understand our expectations and perhaps also reflect diverse content. So in this session, we're going to think generally about our own syllabi, whichever one you've chosen to bring with you today. And then we'll discuss 3 elements of equity, including transparency, the use of welcoming language, and diverse representation in terms of course content. All right. So next slide, please. I'm going to give you a few examples from my own reflection and some places where perhaps my syllabi weren't as equitable and maybe changes that I made as I went forward. So this is an excerpt from my syllabus from 2018 prior to starting the program at CMU. And if we look at this particular excerpt from my syllabus, this is just the very beginning, right, where I talk about here are, some information about the course, where we're going to be located, modality. But there's a few things that I noticed that I could improve upon in terms of incorporating equity, right? We can see the language in the first paragraph is very cold and it begins with expectations. We can see that there isn't any really warmth. There's a lot of academic jargon. And then immediately following the online expectation is the withdrawal policy. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to include expectations for online work or, policies that are irrelevant. But I think putting them first here without even introducing myself or providing a way for students to know how they can contact me, right, perhaps could be places where when it comes to equity, I could make some changes. So let's kind of move on to the next slide. And so as we kind of go down, there's one more thing I wanted to point out. Towards the end of the schedule, the work schedule, I've included this term flexible deadlines, which I don't include anywhere else in this particular syllabus. And again, I think this is an error in transparency, or not an error, but I think this is a place where I could be more transparent. So here, we see this in term flexible deadlines. I haven't explained it anywhere else. And if I was a student, I would look at this kind of term and wonder, well, what does that word flexible deadline mean? How is it going to apply to the work that I'm doing in this class? And I see it's at the end of the semester, but I'm not sure that I understand what that means. So there's a few places in my own syllabi that I thought about revision that include these 3 elements. We can move on to the next slide. So now I'm going to ask you to take a look at your own syllabi again and reflect. And let's review some of these questions. So do you think there are elements of equitable practices in your syllabi as you understand the term equity and as you define it in your context? How would you then think about your students? How would your students define equity in the classroom? In kind of whatever way they might use, they might not use the academic term, but there are other ways I think you can think of equity in the classroom. How might they use those? And then as you think about your students and their definition, does your own syllabus and the way that you've practiced it meet that equitable definition from your students? And then finally, what kind of weight or how does the student's perception of equity impact the way that we craft or design our syllabus? So I'll give us a little bit more time to reflect here. We'll have about 7 minutes, but just kind of answer as many of these questions as you like, and then we'll move on to the next slide. 30 seconds for everyone to finish their final thoughts. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next slide as you finish your ideas. So take a look at your responses and, what were some of the thoughts that you had about your syllabus and how you incorporate or center students in their syllabi? Maybe we can just put a thought in the chat if you have it, if you don't want to speak aloud.
I can jump in. I was just practicing my good Zoom wait time here. So I'll just go ahead and read what I wrote here. I think that's probably a little bit easier. I said, Yes, to some extent, there are equitable practices. I note that attendance in synchronous meetings can be missed and provide an opportunity for students to write a brief reflection on the recorded portions of the class sessions if they have to miss. Many, I would actually say probably most of my assignments and assessments are a pass-fail with an opportunity to revise and resubmit for all assignments. Deadlines, these are online, mostly asynchronous with like the one class meeting each week or every other week. So a lot of asynchronous work. Deadlines are on Mondays at noon rather than some absurd time like Saturday at midnight. So people can enjoy their weekends and their families and their lives without having to stress about a deadline, and they could still pick it up on Monday morning. They can always email me before the deadline and say that I need to be a little bit late. To help with those such as the Writing Center and Student Disability Services, Office of Civil Rights, Veterans Resource Center, Office of Native American Programs, the library research. Those are all with links on the syllabus. But again, I don't know that I'm doing everything I could or should. I think that those things are probably steps in the right direction, but even in just getting started, kind of clicking through this syllabus review guide, I realize I've got work to do.
I think that's true of everyone. I think that, you know, even if you've incorporated practices in my class, I try to incorporate equitable practices in my class, but I'm always finding ways that I can improve. A great teacher once told me that we're always learning as teachers. And I'm lucky to be learning from all of you here today. So as we move forward, I think, you know, I think this idea of support and equitable practice kind of go hand in hand. But let's talk a little bit more about these three practices that I'm going to share with you. So let's move forward. One more slide. So we're going to really focus today, and I'll try to get through as much as I can. I might only go through one example of each, but of types of equitable practice you can incorporate into your course. And so I said at the beginning, we're going to talk about transparency, welcoming language, and representation. And of course, I could do a presentation on each one of these elements, easily do a presentation on each one of these elements, but we'll try to get through as many as we can today. So when we're talking about transparency, we're talking about removing assumptions about what students may or may not know in the classroom, and providing clarity in the way that we describe what it is that we'd like them to do, or maybe just mystifying what students need to do to be successful in the course. When we discuss welcoming language, again, as I mentioned before, right, our syllabi are often our first impression from our students. So welcoming language can set the tone for the course and reinforce that our classes are a community that is welcome and safe for students to learn. In terms of representation, you know, and the syllabus our course includes diverse experiences, voices, cultures, languages that allow students to be able to see themselves in the content of the course and make connections to their own lives, and then also be introduced to other experiences that might not be their own. So this is what we're going to be discussing as we review equitable practices. Next slide, please. So I've kind of created a Google Doc, like a little checklist. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat that you can use as you review the practices that are incorporated for each of these elements. And we're going to begin with transparency. And again, there's a handful here that I've included, but of course, this is not all. There's plenty more. And I'm sure there are things that you might do in your classroom that aren't included on this list. So feel free to add to the list or take notes on the document as you kind of make your own notes on the document. So kind of after reviewing this definition of transparency, there's few examples that we can cover. So giving a course description, right? Just telling your students what the course is about, what they're going to learn, and how that learning applies to the work that they're going to do beyond the course. So how are they going to apply these particular course skills to their lives, to their future work? Providing contact information for students and letting them know when it is that they can reach out to you and where they can reach out to you, whether it's setting appointments for conferences or email or Remind, or the other kinds of programs and apps that one might use in their course, but making students aware and providing clarification in the ways that they can utilize those resources to contact you. So there's just a couple examples of transparency. One other thing I think we can do is to eliminate definitions of things students might not know the meaning of. So for example, office hours is something that professors use quite a bit, but we all kind of assume that students understand that office hours are for student conferences or to chat with our students, but students don't always know that when they come into college. So one of the things that we can do is say, yes, those are office hours or student hours, or provide a way for students to understand that that time is what we spend with them, right? That time is available on my schedule for me to talk to you and provide you with support. So even providing just definitions for things that we might assume that students know. All right, so let's move on to the idea of welcoming language. Next slide, please. So again, I'm going to go over a couple of them, but you can use the checklist and think about whether or not you incorporate some welcoming, language in your own syllabi. So, does the syllabi provide a willingness to share with students? How about that? How does the syllabi provide with students a way that tells students that we are all equal members of this community, and if they aren't feeling comfortable in the community, they can come and talk to their professor. One of the things that I've done in my class, and I think I got this from Brown University, was a statement that says, we're going to talk about difficult discussions or have difficult discussions in this class. And if you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to come to me. And if you're not comfortable coming to me, then please chat with your advisor or another colleague to be able to chat with me. And we can talk together about how, I might need to make a change in my class, or what we can do to make this a more to make this an environment where you feel comfortable learning. So that's something that you can incorporate in addition to whether or not you're willing to receive feedback. And I think that kind of goes into that vein, right? If you have a question about class, if you have questions about Blackboard, feel free to come and talk to me about what it is that you're seeing that I might need to fix. So I often have students say, hey, professor, I found that there was an error in the LMS. And I'm like, great, thank you so much for telling me, because by telling me, you're helping me share something with the whole class that I can fix. So I encourage students to come to me and say, hey, this thing that it might be something you need to look at. So whether or not do you put that in your syllabus, asking them to come to you if they see any errors or any questions that they might have. So I think that providing that welcoming language can, again, mean a lot of different things. And Becky's kind of staying in the chat. Right. And I think there's a few things that, we can think about in terms of context, right? So not everything that I do in my syllabi will be the same as what other folks might do in their particular, in their context. But at the same time, I think she's saying, so I already have 3/4 of a page of notes of things I want to check in mind and do a read through. And this is a really simple task that I can do to make a difference. Yeah, and I agree. Thank you, Becky. But, I think there's also, things when we come to welcoming syllabus, whether or not you're speaking to your students directly, as opposed to using that academic verbiage as well, as another welcoming strategy. And if we want to edit out some of that in post, feel free. I think I kind of talked a little bit off. So let's move on to the next element. So let's move on to this final category of representation. So equity pedagogy is often aligned with social justice and culturally responsive pedagogy. As Gloria Ladson-Billings said in reference to culturally responsive pedagogy, it's just good teaching. When we speak of representation, we also might refer to Radine Sims Bishop's work in mentioning mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. So mirrors that allow students to see themselves in the course content, windows that give students an opportunity to see and experience outside of their own, and sliding doors that allow students an opportunity to place themselves into what they're learning. So I think by incorporating representations of students' experiences in the course, or connecting genuinely with students, communities, and the work that they would like to do. We're providing them with opportunities to do all of those things that allow them to be more engaged and to see how they can be successful. So again, a couple of examples that we have. Does your syllabus share the benefits of hearing from diverse voices and explain the reasons why you're incorporating diverse experiences into your classroom? Do you have content in your class that is reflective of race, gender, ethnicity, language, sexuality, disability, or ability, and other diverse and lived perspectives within your content? And I think this is something that that folks can do in different ways. I have a colleague at Harper who teaches in the sciences and will often use data sets from all over the world as a way to bring in content, diverse content into the course. But I think having a global perspective really adds to the course. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can incorporate diverse representation that's not just in text. So again, take a minute to go through the checklist. And this is our last element. So, you know, what is it that you incorporate into your own class? Are there other ideas that you might want to share? And again, I know that, you know, content is something that how you choose content is different from, you know, in different perspectives. So, oh, you're welcome.
Sorry to interrupt you, Anna. Are you asking us to do another quick write, or are we going to discuss this right now together?
I think we're going to go through that. I think the next slide is going to be a revision, but just do a quick go through that checklist, see if there's anything that you've done, and then if you want to add in a few notes, you can. Yes, so do a quick write. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe just a couple minutes this time. Well, that was quick moves there to get back us on the record. So I just want to show you some of the things that I've done to revise my own syllabi. So on the left side, if everybody's looking at this in the right way, is what I showed you earlier, right? That I think a syllabi that could use a little bit of work. And then on the right side is the revisions that I've made, including this is the one from this past year. So the revised syllabus is a little different, right? I've included a lot more detailed information about ways that students can reach me with questions. I provided dates, times, and instructions regarding my office hours, even taking the moment in terms of transparency of defining what office hours means. So they know, right, that it's important for me that they have my contact information so they can contact me with questions. If we look at the language that's highlighted towards the bottom of the slide, I don't know that you can read it because it's quite small, but here is what it says. This English 101 course is entitled English Composition. This means that our course will really focus on helping you write for your college courses. Excuse me. The skills that you learn in this class will help you with the writing you do in all of your college classes. When we learn to write, we can build upon those skills while reflecting on different topics. So it's a little, you can notice that the language is speaking directly to students. It's defining terms and helping them understand how they're going to incorporate the skills that they're using in this class, or learning in this class, to all of the work that they're going to be doing in the future. So this is one way that I've incorporated welcoming language and transparency, a little bit of transparency in my syllabus now. And of course, there's always work to be done. I do also include the withdrawal policy, but you'll notice it's not the very beginning anymore, right? It's lower to a different section. If we go on to the next slide, this talks a little bit about that flexible deadlines terms that was just kind of floating and inserted at the end of the syllabus. So instead of that term, I now have, and this is something I got from a colleague, Judy Nitsch at Harper College, it's verbiage, and the idea for the late pass, but I now have a late work policy and a late pass that students can incorporate. And even in this passage, there's welcoming language and speaking directly to students. It even says, so if life gets messy, right, there's still a chance to finish the work for the course, right? Allowing students the opportunity to create the late pass, to plan ahead and think about, you know, when it is that they can turn in this assignment within, you know, 2 weeks, I think is the policy. So even in this, even in this change, right, I'm incorporating these various elements that we've been discussing. So if we go on to the next slide, now it's some time for you to think about what you're going to do. And I think Becky already started speaking about some of the changes she was going to make. And so thinking about transparency, welcoming language, and representation, just a couple questions in each category, and you don't have to answer them all. You can take one category and just think about what changes you might make in your own course to incorporate equitable practices. And this will give us about 5 to 7 minutes of writing time, maybe 5 minutes. Actually, it says 3 minutes. Let's take 3 minutes because I know that we're getting close to the end of the session. Okay, just a few more moments. But I will say, as you're kind of finishing your ideas, the questions that I got here were both from the syllabus review guide, and then the 2 resources at the end of the checklist that I've given you, the discussion on courageous conversation race in schools and the ACACA equity guidelines. But as we kind of think about this, and I'll kind of go first, what are some of the changes that you're hoping now to make in your own classroom? And we can keep this slide up for the sake of the discussion. For me, one of the things that I'm glad Lori was, I think earlier mentioned a letter. That's something I plan to do as I revise my courses over the summer, is to simplify my LMS and incorporate at the very beginning of each week a letter that welcomes students into the week's learning and kind of goes through the list of things that they need to do for that week. So what is it that you're planning? Becky, you were mentioning a few things earlier. What were you thinking of?
Yeah. So as I've said, kind of in different modals when we've been talking about different things, high school syllabus looks vastly different than a college syllabus. Just the sheer number of things I have to talk about in a high school syllabus is much different. I don't have to give them like an entire semester's timeline of assignments, for example. But there's always been a section of my syllabus that I despised the way that it just phrases, because it does feel cold. I didn't have the word for it until you said it's cold, it's unwelcoming. So I'm really going to change a section of this on all of the syllabuses that I have for next year, and it's how can I be successful in this class? Because again, the kind of key thing when you teach, when you teach anybody, but really on day 1, day 2, first week of class, really all I want to know is who's this person that's going to be teaching me? Do I think that they'll like me or at least tolerate me? And then what do I have to do in order to be successful? And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a section like, what can I do to be successful in this class? Or how can I be successful in this class? And just kind of like chunk those into like bite-sized chunks, because one thing about our school is we've really kind of gravitated towards PBIS. And a lot of that is like, how can we phrase things positively instead of negatively? So instead of like saying, don't run, you spend a lot of time thinking about like, please walk, like some of those things. And just, I think that shift will, I think that's going to make me a lot happier. But again, like you said, I'm probably going to look at this syllabus again in like end of July when I start making those changes, and I'm going to be going, there's a lot more that needs to be done than just that section. But
Yeah.
I feel really good about, I'm going to have a good section.
Thanks, Becky.
I did something similar that Becky acknowledged. When I read it, what I wrote down on mine was cold, just the way I just jumped in. I didn't talk about how excited I am to have the kids, to meet them, whatever. And so that's something that I want to fix in the future. But one thing that I did do well that I noted was I talked a lot about choice of what you read and how you read and when you read and where you read. And so that part I think I've done well. But overall, my first sentence was, wow, I'm really struck by how unwelcoming my letter sounds compared to others I've written prior. I don't know why I made that change, but woo, I've got some work to do.
Thank you, Lori, for sharing that. I think that's, yeah, I think that's, you know, I think anytime we look at a document and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just in the nature of our work, but, you know, we always think of ways that we can revise and improve. And I really am inspired by so many of the educators that come to our CRWP sessions that, and their willingness just to keep learning as lifelong learners and all for the benefit of their students, which I think is awesome. Troy, did you want to add anything? Not to call you out.
I think for me, given that I teach adult learners largely in online contexts, largely asynchronously, I need to be more conscious of some of these things, because if I'm not, then they're definitely going to get swept away and forgotten. So like this question about lived experience, knowing that even though I'm an education professor and ostensibly all the courses that I teach are designed for educators, we do have students from outside of traditional K-12 or higher ed settings. And I've got to constantly be thinking about accommodations and adaptations of assignments and things like that for them too. And maybe I need to be even more explicit about that in my assignment design and assessment strategies. So thanks.
No, thank you. So one of the things that I just like to mention is that a lot of the equity practices that we've been talking about are something that have been compiled together by my own institution. And I think this tool is great, but it is just one of many tools, right? I think there are a lot of ways to think about how we can incorporate and revise our classes to be more equity minded. We can also use data, right? Qualitative and quantitative data to answer some of those questions about where and how we can incorporate equity. But one of the things that at our institution at Harper College, our Academy for Teaching Excellence compiled what we call AMY. So it's the Applying Equity Matrix. And it is really just a list of practices and various categories of equity that you can incorporate into your classroom. So these are practices that were shared by Harper faculty that address the needs of their students in their classroom in the last 2 years. So I just want to provide this as a resource for anyone if you'd like to use it. Of course, you don't have to. And, you know, this is, you know, most of these practices were considered in a college context, but that doesn't mean that they can't apply. So there's also a few resources listed on the worksheet that I gave you that I hope that you'll take a moment to review. And I guess at this point, I'm just going to ask if anybody has any questions. I know that we have one more slide or a couple more slides. If you could skip 2 slides ahead, that'd be great. And but back up. Just wanted to take a moment. Troy, would you mind speaking to this particular slide?
Yes, thanks, Ana. So as we come to the end of this year's webinar series, we just offer a brief reminder that Ana and all the teachers who have given of their time and expertise this year to lead these webinars are part of the Chippewa River Writing Project. They've done so without taking any kind of stipend. And yet we do use some funds to continue our own professional growth by sending our teacher leaders to conferences and workshops and providing for leadership development opportunities, and then also doing book clubs, writing groups, and a number of other things. So if you have enjoyed the learning that you've had through this webinar series in 2021, 2022, and you are so inclined, we would encourage you to go to giving.cmich.edu and select Chippewa River Writing Project as the gift of choice. And we thank all of you for your continued support of our local site work.
Thank you, Troy. And so I just want to thank everyone for coming. And I know that are we out of time for sure? But if you'd like, you can always reach out to me. I can, provide my email to Becky to place with with the video. But I'm happy to take any questions anytime from any one of our colleagues. And I just appreciate you watching or attending this afternoon. So thanks, everyone. I can stick around if anybody has questions like that are right here too. So I don't know
Thank
what
you,
other people's
Ana.
schedules are, but I can. Yeah.
Thank
Oh no,
you.
thank you for coming, Lori, and saying really smart, cool things. And
My pleasure.
that
I always
inspired
learn a
me.
lot from you guys. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too.